the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, Mazin Namdi Okwadipo, our revered past presidents, Your Excellency Senator Amonson, members of council, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am highly honored to stand before you to chair this very important session on public accountability, a driver of transparent leadership and governance. The session, the lead presenter of the session is His Excellency Governor Nasir El-Rufai, who earlier presented the paper when he was on the stage at the session before now. However, we have two discussants of the same paper in persons of Mr. Anthony Ayine, FCA, the Distinguished Auditor General for the Federation, and Mr. Dele Oladipo, FCA, a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers and one of the members of the steering committee of the ICAN Accountability Index. The ICAN Accountability Index, as you all know, is a tool for assessing performance of governance and public finance management across the federal and state governments. The first of the report is this report was concluded last year, and Kaduna State happened to be the first amongst all the states of the Federation and also the federal government, came first in the assessment. The federal government came third, and perhaps that is the reason that the Institute invited Governor El-Rufai and Mr. Tony Ayine to participate in this session. Without much ado, I would invite Mr. Tony Ayine, the Auditor General for the Federation, to discuss Governor El-Rufai's paper, after which Mr. Dele Oladipo will also give us his insights, and then we will conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The president of our great institute permit me for want of time, because I'm told I have just 15 minutes to go straight to discussing the paper, even though I just got it a few minutes ago. But from glancing through the paper, because at the time of presentation I have not arrived here, let me start by congratulating the Kaduna State Governor and Kaduna State indeed for being ranked first in the ICAN Accountability Index. I am not surprised from the presentation. From his paper, it's clear. He introduced reforms to improve public finance management, introducing things like the Treasury single account and the preparation and publication of annual financial statement, adopting IPSAS. He mentioned about human capital development, introduced technology, and their website, the annual financial statement are there from what is stated in the paper. And clearly too, the state signed on to open government partnership. No wonder from the ICAN Accountability Index, It is on record that Kaduna State supplied all information requested, 74%, just 26% that was not given. And we see that all this can be fitted, properly into the topic we are discussing, public accountability and leadership. He mentioned also in his paper the credible budget being prepared in Kaduna State. The draft budget is subjected to town hall meetings. It's discussed. That is an aspect of opponent, the transparency as the topic here, public accountability, driver of transparency, leadership and governance. After subjecting the draft budget to a town hall meeting, it is finalized and then sent to the legislature. Now, public accountability, it is a concept, we speak of the duty, obligation of public office holders to render account to citizens for their actions and inaction, in particular for their stewardship and application of resources which belong to the Commonwealth. And from the paper presented, it is clear. The relationship between the states and the citizen, answerability, to the people is what we can see from the paper. And I want to say that the citizens have a right to get information and also to demand for it. Leadership, there are a few things I would like to emphasize here. There are two sides to the effectiveness of leadership. Firstly, there is the commitment of the leader to being accountable, that is, doing the right thing. But secondly, and just as importantly, also there is the willingness of the institution or organization to also be accountable and do the right thing. What am I saying? In other words, a tree cannot make a forest. This is one area in our context as a country we are having challenges. You may have a leader who is strong and doing well, but a tree does not make a forest. And for a leader to be effective, he or she needs good followership. It is therefore very important that institutions support and work well with good leaders. It is also important that institutions are strong enough to avoid or survive being damaged by bad leaders. There is therefore a need for synergy or good congruence, and this is much easier to achieve if all parties are genuinely committed to good governance. There is also a need for good leadership at various levels, not just restricted to the top. At every institution, if we have good leaders at various levels among all these institutions responsible for public financial management in particular, starting with those responsible for policy, those dealing with budgeting, those incurring expenditure, and all the way to those charged with the scrutiny of spending. Bad leadership in any of these areas has a severe impact on the accountability framework. Good and strong leadership, on the other hand, will help any country achieve the dividend of economic growth and development. A little bit on transparency. Transparency simply is openness, and it speaks to the level of information that must be made available to the public on how actions are taken and public resources are used. I've already mentioned the case of Kaduna State, and I'm not surprised why they came top. Unlike with the private sector where information may be withheld for reasons such as commercial confidentiality, competitive advantage, etc. In the public sector, there is usually no sound reason why transactions and actions undertaken by public officials should not be disclosed in full, even where some information is withheld for valid reasons, for example, regarding military or security matters. I think the concept of transparency the concept of transparency in the public sector requires that this happens only rarely, and that the substance of an action is still fully disclosed, even where the detail is not made available. Take, for instance, the military may disclose an intention to invest in new equipment and give information on costs and the nature of equipment, etc., but not on the actual supplier, date of supply, transportation, routes, and all that. This concept of transparency, the duty to inform the public, and the right of citizens to access information is enshrined in the freedom of information laws of most democracies. In essence, the public has a right to know. I have already commended the Kaduna State government for doing that. What about governance? Governance refers to the framework by which this right of the citizen to know is protected and in some instances enforced. The overarching principle is that public office holders should be mindful of the need to be transparent and therefore not engage in any action that may not meet the expectations of the public, that is, not engage in actions they may not wish to account for. There is, however, a recognition that unless some form of enforcement or oversight framework is in place, public office holders may not be transparent or may not be fully transparent. To this end, key institutions involved in the governance process have important roles to play, especially in financial matters. The governance framework includes A, the setting of budgets. And if you look at the ICAN accountability index, credibility of budgets was an area of assessment. The setting of budgets, the expenditure of the sums budgeted, and financial reporting by those charged with governance, also known as executive, accounting officers, and senior leadership. B, external audit by suitably independent audit institutions, for example, Office of Auditor General at the state, federal level, and even Auditor General local government. And lastly, C, scrutiny of audit findings by the elected representatives of the people, that is parliamentarians, and in particular, the committees responsible for public account. If we have a situation where these three levels are carried out, creditably, and they are intended to be conducted by entities or institutions completely independent of each other, with each entity fulfilling its mandate only with the desire to meet the expectations of the public in terms of good stewardship in the use of resources, probity, and accountability. But what happens when one or more of these independent entities fails to perform its role appropriately? The governance or accountability sector is said to be weak, broken, or even seen to be a failed project. For governance and accountability to work effectively, the key actors must genuinely be independent of one another. Where one arm is dependent on the other for conduct of a function, it is easy to see how accountability can be easily undermined. Now, let me also say that this is the kind of scenario that causes the public to lose confidence in institutions and speak of cabals and godfathers. What about the role of the legislature? Very, very critical. The legislature is, in essence, the last institutional hope of the public in the event that there are weaknesses in the accountability chain. Where the legislature is strong and alive to its responsibility, they can drive improvement across the rest of the chain and ensure accountability. But where the legislature is weak or not interested in transparency and accountability, even when the other institutions have performed their roles effectively, very little impact may be achieved, very little impact may be achieved, or as it is the legislature that ultimately enforces accountability. If you look at the ICAN Accountability Index, you see the scores, in the financial scrutiny, both audit and legislative aspects. They are scored there. So now, specifically, where independent external audits are conducted and reported upon to the legislature and no further action is taken, for such action is considerably delayed, or such action considerably delayed, perpetrators of questionable acts will most likely go unpunished, and systemic weaknesses will definitely persist. Let's note that law enforcement organizations and the judiciary are necessarily reactive and can only act on petitions or allegations. They will not be aware of the vast majority of infractions. The role of the public before a roundup. It should therefore be noted the public must drive public accountability. Yesterday, where Professor Lumumba, he said something that in Nigeria, the problem may be that the people are not yet fed up with, things happening. You discover a situation where in our country today, if somebody maybe has stolen money because it's from your own part of the country or your relation, there is nothing wrong about that. Even if the person gives you money, you will not see anything wrong about that. And when we have a situation where the public allows that, permits such things, then we have a key problem about accountability culture. Whereas the public may not be able to hold civil servants directly to account, they are responsible for electing political office holders and legislators and can hold this to account, at least through the ballot box. Ultimately, if the public are undeserved through a lack of transparency and accountability, they are democratic levers for ensuring the situation changes. If the public is not concerned or does not demand accountability and transparency, it is highly likely this will affect the behavior of all involved in the accountability sector, starting with the publicly elected official. And perhaps this is, a situation we are having in our country because the public appear to permit certain things because of one affiliation or the other. In summary, if the public really desires accountability and transparency, it should ensure both are a key aspect of the democratic process by which leaders are elected. It should also demand that these elected leaders properly implement the governance function, which is their primary duty. In conclusion, Mr. President, distinguished audience, as my final word, professional institutions like ours also have a major role to play as almost virtually, our members are working, they are involved in various aspects of financial transactions in both the public and private sectors. It is important to reflect on the fact that members of this professional sign up to the code of ethics that they are to comply with. And despite that, there is still so much corruption and misoperation in day-to-day life. How many members of, let me restrict to our own professional institutes, are sanctioned each year for being a part of failures in accountability? What contributions are the professional bodies making? I think we need to examine this area very closely. Where we have a situation where maybe a particular organization maybe failed because of accountability is recently where I granted an interview. I stated that in some clients, take for instance, chief executive of institutions, if they are not taking accountability issues seriously, they have no business to remain in such positions. And perhaps we may, yes, we have our code of ethics, we have disciplinary committee, but we need to maybe stretch a little bit. Where there is failure in such institutions and our members, we need to really, look at this area very closely. And I think if we do that, the issue of public accountability and what leadership and governance structure can do, we will have significant improvement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Auditor General for the Federation, Mr. Tony Aine. We have had his contribution. May I now invite Mr. Delhi Aladipo to give us his insights.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The President and members of the Council, His Excellency Senator Bikunle Amosun, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I stand on existing protocols. Like the Chairman of the session said, one of the things that ICAN has done in the recent past, one of the initiatives that the Institute has taken on board is to do an assessment, is to carry out an assessment around public financial management in Nigeria. Now, the paper presenter, His Excellency Governor Nasir El-Rufai, gave us his own experience of what he has been able to achieve in the states, and also put a challenge to accountants to get more involved in politics. But in terms of measuring or assessing public accountability, transparency, and governance, it's important that we don't task our politicians with the aim of providing these things, of providing the leadership, the accountability, and the transparency, but we must also be able to hold them to account. Right? And how do we accountants make sure that we hold them to account in these things? Is by having a verifiable methodology of assessing them and reporting to them. The chairman did mention that ICAN has carried out the ICAN Accountability Index, and which was actually launched at last year's annual accountants conference. Now, the Accountability Index has 5 pillars. It stands on 5 pillars. I'm not going to read out all of them, but I'm just going to bring out 1 or 2 of them that are very, very important when we talk about public accountability and transparency. Now, those I'd like to focus on for now, based on the paper presented by Governor Nasir, is external audit and legislative scrutiny, as well as controls in budget execution and accounting. Now, you have heard that in the assessment that ICAN carried out, Cardinal States came tops in terms of provision of information and following laid down public financial management regulations, following up with the Constitution, complying with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, etc. A detailed work was done, and those findings are actually very interesting, and I'll urge everyone, if you have not read that Accountability Index report, to go and read it. Now, but I'd like to share with you a couple of interesting statistics from that report, if you don't mind. The first thing is that the Constitution and the Fiscal Responsibility Act require that entities in this case being government entities, the federal government and the state government, that they submit their financial reports for audit. Those financial reports are audited and they are presented for legislative scrutiny. It will interest you to note that as of December 2018, 91% of entities being the federal government and the state government, 91% of them had not had their financial reports audited for the previous years. So if you talk about 2016 and 2017 financial reports of the state governments, 91% of them had not been audited as of 2018. And what does that tell you? It raises the question of accountability. When government spends money, we need to hold them to account. A lot of governments now are on the ICAN-ngr drive. Everybody wants to raise money, everybody wants to spend. The governor talked about spending on health and education, focusing on that, and him believing that those things should actually be matrices for measuring the financial performance of states. True. Right? It's very true that we must also focus on how government has been able to spend money for the benefit of the state. But if you don't have a way of measuring the government, of benchmarking them against each other, perhaps we are not there yet. We may not be providing enough interest or showing enough interest as accountants in the way these things are done. We know that we have a lot of professional colleagues working at various MDAs, working within government, and a lot more within the private sector. But there is actually a requirement, right? There's a need for us to get more involved in looking at how governments at the federal level, at the state level, at the local government level, at how they render reports and the quality of the reports. We also had a session earlier on that talked about data, artificial intelligence, blockchain, etc. It's one thing to have data, it's another thing to have information, but it's entirely a different thing to be able to draw insights from that information. Accountants have the skills and the training to draw insights for that information. That is the challenge that we need to give to ourselves. A, how do we get the information? How do we draw insights? And how do we interact with people that are involved in government, that are involved in public policy? How do we interact with them to make sure that, look, people are watching you. You are playing with people's lives. You are managing people's money. You need to be held to account, right? The responsibility of us as accountants is to drive that. Secondly, I would also like to talk about public policy. One of the things that the ICAN Accountability Index also addressed is the access to public information. The Constitution of the Federal Republic, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, Procurement Act, there are a lot of regulations at the federal and state governments that mandate governments at different levels to make certain information publicly available. And what do we mean by information being publicly available? That's information that is not restricted in its distribution, information that you do not have to pay for to obtain, information that you do not need to register to obtain, and information that is free of charge. Now, all the laws and the regulations that are in place, we looked at the reporting requirements of those laws and assess how well the federal government and the state government have been doing in providing those information. Do you know what the assessment was? Only 17%, 17, of the information that is required by laws for governments to provide, only 17% of that information has been provided. Now, by any standard, that is a failure, right? That is a failure, but for us, it shouldn't be a failure. For us, it should be an opportunity. It should be an avenue for us to deepen relationship, deepen our interaction with the government, particularly for those of us in the public sector, but also for ICAN as a body. We need to put these numbers, we need to put these assessments in front of the government at the federal level, at the state level, put it in front of them that, look guys, you guys are not meeting the requirements of the law. You are not meeting the requirements of the various regulations that you have signed up to protect. Accountants should be at the forefront of leading those conversations, leading those discussions with those in the public sector. That is the only way that we can retake up our position, our pride of place that our training has given us, that our institution has given us, that our experience has given us. And that is one of the critical ways and one of the very important ways that politicians can begin to take us even more seriously. Apologies to Senator Ibikula Amosun. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dele, for your insights. Ladies and gentlemen, we have had the benefit of hearing the main paper from the lead presenter, Dr. Nasser Arubaiyi, and also the two discussants, Mr. Tony Ayeni, Auditor General of the Federation, and Mr. Dele Obadipo. Thank you very much for your insights. Time is fast spent, and I see that the next session is getting ready to start. We have some questions, and looking from the hour, I see there are 3 questions so far for this session. I can take 2 out of them. Essentially, the 2 questions seem to be on international public sector accounting standards, and perhaps the distinguished Auditor General of the Federation will be in a position to take one of them or all 2 of them. The question 2 is application of international public sector accounting standards on many of the government infrastructures which are peculiar in nature. Example, road infrastructures seem so difficult. Can there be improved or modified standards to help public accountants? And the second question is about impairment of assets, which is to be calculated and charged in new standards, does not seem to be working in many public organizations due to non-backing of boards, which is of course those concerned with governance. What can be done to gain their support? The second question is about impairment of assets, which is to be calculated and charged in new standards, does not seem to be working in many public organizations due to non-backing of boards. What can be done to gain their support? Lack of support or probably understanding.
Thank you. The first question essentially has to do with, capacity development, which we have also noticed in the system. You recall that there was a committee, Facts IFSA Implementation Committee, carry out training. The issue is not really of amending the standards, but developing the skill. This is the area where our institute can step in terms of training, because we have noticed it even at the federal level. We are discussing the issue. I think the capacity to handle, especially the in the private sector is different, because we have been handling accrual method of accounting for a very long time. But it's still a huge challenge, at the public arena. And so what is required is the training of the public sector personnel to be able to, a kind of hand-on training to be able to handle this. Again, even at the second question, we have already commenced public enlightenment, because chief executive and board. I'll give you an example. There is a particular parastatal. The external auditor has completed his work, but for the board to sign off the account, the board refused signing. And I visited that establishment to give assurance to there that if you are in doubt, why not engage? Maybe because the current boards were not there when the accounts were prepared and audited. I said, okay, why not engage another accountant to vet what the previous board have done, to give you assurance for you to sign. So it's a matter of public enlightenment to educate the boards, because we have also noted that quite a number of boards, even at the government level, the last retreat, presidential retreat, this matter came up, and it was stated very clearly that the Secretary to Government of the Federation should take it as a deliberate policy. Whenever boards are appointed and inaugurated, there should be a clear layout, training of the board so that they can appreciate what the responsibility as a board is. So these matters are currently going on in government. Thank you.
I don't know if Mr. Daly will have something to add to that.
Again, in addition to the manpower training that the General mentioned, I think it's also important that we also need to realize that another critical success factor will be information. Right? A lot of those decisions, even where you have the support of the board and you have adequately trained manpower, you really need data to be able to take the right decisions. So whilst we are investing in training and we're investing in even development of the board, we should also be investing in information technology. That was discussed earlier today, and I think it is something that, again, government also needs to have a deliberate policy on making sure that we begin as much as possible to automate our systems, as much as possible to gather data in a form that the board can take decisions and be comfortable with those decisions.
Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the session. In summary, what we have heard is that the better the quality of accountability and public finance management in our public sectors, the better will be our economy and accountants, and particularly the Institute of Chartered Accountants has a big role to play in terms of advocacy, capacity building, and challenging, speaking truth to power, challenging those concerned with governance to do the right thing. And luckily, we are having more of our members in the legislation, like, of course, distinguished His Excellency, distinguished Senator Amosu. And I believe that our members and the institute can work more with people like him to improve accountability in the country. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, too. We appreciate you. I'd like to invite the presidency from the president, the vice president, and all of the council members who are seated right there to join us up here, including the immediate past president, to please join us up here for a group photograph with this panel. So we can bring the flags forward now to the president.
It's a pleasure to hand this over to you. It's the same thing. We have to present same thing. It is the same thing. On behalf of the Institute, please accept it from us, and we appreciate that you made our time. On this program, we will invite you very much. Thank you very much.
David, thank you so very much. We really appreciate your contributions to our mental development this morning. So on behalf of the council, we present this to we hope that we will call you in your call. Thank you so very much.
The past president, Madam Bakari, this is a token of our appreciation on behalf of the committee and the institute. We say a big thank you for sharing this session so well. Thank you very much.
Let's put our hands together for this amazing panel and the presidency that has been able to honor them. Thank you very much.